The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. It drummed softly against the kitchen window of a modest two-story home in Seattle's Queen Anne district, a rhythm that had always soothed Daniel Whitmore, but lately it only made the silence between him and his wife feel heavier. The clock above the stove ticked toward midnight. The house was dark except for the low amber glow from the under-cabinet lights. A pot of untouched coffee sat cooling on the counter, its aroma mixing with the faint scent of the lavender candle Emily had lit hours ago, the kind she used when she wanted to mask something. Daniel sat at the table, staring at his phone. Emily had texted an hour ago. "Working late, don't wait up." She worked in marketing, or at least, that was what she told people when they asked. He used to know everything about her job, the projects, the co-workers, the office politics, but lately, her answers had become short, vague. Sometimes evasive. He scrolled through her old messages. The ones from before things had changed. The ones where she still called him Dan, where she still sent heart emojis and random snapshots of her lunch or the city skyline from her office. But now, nothing. Just the bare minimum. And it wasn't just the phone. It was everything, the way she turned away in bed, how her laughter sounded more restrained, how she'd startle when he walked into the room. A car passed outside, headlights slicing across the rain-streaked window. Daniel looked up. His heart gave a small, unreasonable jolt when he saw a shape moving across the street, a woman stepping out of a black SUV. Even through the rain, he recognized her coat. Emily's beige trench, the one with the loose belt and the coffee stain near the cuff. But she wasn't carrying her work tote. And she wasn't alone. Daniel froze. The man walking beside her held an umbrella over them both. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes. They moved close together, too close, the kind of proximity that comes naturally only when it's been practiced before. The man leaned in to say something, and she laughed, a sound muffled by the rain, but still distinct. The laugh Daniel hadn't heard in months. They stopped at the end of the driveway. She touched the man's arm, lightly. Intimately. Then she looked up at the house. Daniel pulled away from the window, his pulse loud in his ears. His hands trembled slightly as he turned off the light over the sink. He stood there in the dark, listening. The front door opened a moment later. The faint creak of wet shoes on the tile. Her soft exhale, practiced, steady. "Dan. You're still up?" He didn't answer right away. He could smell the rain on her coat, the faint trace of men's cologne, not his. "Yeah," he said finally. "Couldn't sleep." Emily hung up her coat, avoiding his eyes. The pause between them stretched, long and fragile. "You look tired," she said. "Rough day?" "Same as usual," he murmured. Then, after a beat, "You?" "Yeah, meetings ran late." Her voice was smooth, almost too smooth. She opened the fridge, pretending to look for something. Daniel watched her reflection in the glass of the cabinet door, the slight tremor in her hand as she reached for the water bottle. He knew, in that instant, that something was very, very wrong. But he said nothing. Not yet. Outside, the rain kept falling. For the next week, Daniel tried to convince himself that what he'd seen that night didn't mean what he thought it did. Seattle's rain had a way of distorting things, reflections, distances, people's outlines. Maybe it wasn't Emily. Maybe he'd imagined the closeness, the touch, the laughter. But the mind is cruel when it wants to protect you. It builds excuses out of thin air and names them hope. Every morning, Emily would leave for work earlier than usual, her heels clicking briskly against the hardwood floor, her phone always clutched tightly in her hand. And every evening, Daniel found himself checking the time, counting the hours between when she said she'd leave the office and when he heard her key in the lock. Sometimes, he'd step out onto the porch when he heard a car door slam outside, just to watch. And every time, she'd flinch a little when she saw him there, as if he'd caught her in the middle of something. One night, over dinner, Daniel finally asked. You've been coming home late a lot. Big projects? Emily kept her eyes on her plate. Yeah. We've got a new client from Portland. It's a whole rebranding thing. Long hours. Aha. He wanted to believe her. He really did. But there was something about the way she said, client, like she'd rehearsed it too many times. A few days later, Daniel was in his home office, a small converted guest room filled with the quiet hum of his laptop and the smell of old coffee. He was a civil engineer, mostly working remote since the pandemic. Logical. Analytical. He dealt in structure and evidence. And that's what made it worse, because he started to notice patterns. Emily's phone, always face down. Her sudden interest in running again, even though she'd hated it for years. A second gym bag in her car. A new perfume, subtle but unfamiliar. He told himself not to snoop. But the truth doesn't wait politely, it seeps in. That Friday afternoon, while backing up files on their shared computer, he stumbled upon a folder labeled client_work_2025. Inside were PDFs, invoices, and one draft email left unsent. It was addressed to someone named Aaron Blake. He didn't recognize the name, but the subject line made his stomach tighten. Last night. I can't stop thinking about it. He clicked it. The body of the message was brief, unfinished. You made me feel like myself again. I don't know what this means, but... Then it ended abruptly, as if she'd been interrupted. Daniel sat back, the cursor blinking at him like a pulse. His first instinct was denial, maybe it was a work thing, maybe a creative exercise. But the ache in his chest said otherwise. He printed the email and folded it into his pocket like evidence in a case he didn't want to prosecute. Saturday morning came with an uneasy brightness. The clouds finally broke, sunlight glinting off the wet pavement. Emily was in the shower when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Daniel shouldn't have looked. But when he saw the name Aaron B., his hand moved on its own. A text. Missed you last night. Coffee later? Same place. He opened the photo attached below it, a small cafe table, 2 empty mugs, rain-speckled glass in the background. He recognized it immediately, Fremont Coffee Company, the place they used to go on Sundays before everything started falling apart. He stared at the screen, feeling a cold, surreal calm wash over him. By the time she stepped out of the bathroom, he was downstairs, pouring coffee, the ordinary kind, the ritual kind, as if nothing had happened. Morning, she said softly, towel wrapped around her hair. Morning. You okay? Yeah. Just, thinking. She smiled faintly, kissed his cheek, and walked away, the same mouth that had said I love you 1,000 times and now carried the weight of a lie. That evening, Daniel drove aimlessly through the rain, tracing the roads of their old life, Gasworks Park, the bookstore on 5th, the diner they'd gone to after their first big fight. Everywhere he looked, there were ghosts of them, 2 people who used to belong to each other. He parked near the cafe in Fremont and waited. He didn't know what he wanted, proof. Confrontation. Closure. At 6:12 p.m., she appeared. Her trench coat again, her hair tied back, eyes darting nervously as she stepped inside. 5 minutes later, a man joined her, mid-30s, tall, confident in that careless way that made Daniel instantly hate him. Aaron Blake. He watched them through the rain-spotted glass. Aaron leaned close, said something that made her smile, the real smile, the one Daniel hadn't seen in months. He didn't take photos. Didn't record. Just watched, until he couldn't anymore. Then he drove home, heart hollow, mind spinning. She came home late again. He was waiting in the living room, lights low, the printed email folded neatly on the coffee table. We need to talk, he said. Her expression froze. What about? About Aaron Blake. The silence that followed was deafening. She didn't ask who that was. Didn't pretend confusion. Just closed her eyes. How much do you know? Enough. Then I guess there's nothing left to say. You could at least try, he said, his voice breaking. Tell me it was a mistake. Tell me I'm wrong. She looked at him, tears glinting in her eyes. I can't. Because it wasn't. Daniel felt something inside him go still, not rage, not even heartbreak. Just stillness. How long? A few months. Why? Because I felt invisible, Dan. You stopped looking at me years ago. You buried yourself in work, in routines, in everything except us. And he saw me. So that makes it okay? No. It makes it human. Her words cut deeper than shouting ever could. I didn't plan this, she whispered. It just happened. He stared at her, unable to speak. For years, they'd built a life brick by brick, mortgage, anniversaries, Christmas cards, and now, in a single night, it all felt like smoke. Do you love him? He finally asked. A long pause. I don't know. That was worse than yes. She moved out 2 weeks later. The house felt wrong without her, too clean, too quiet, as if even the rain outside had grown hesitant. Daniel went through the motions, work, groceries, empty evenings. He tried to sleep, but every sound reminded him of her, the click of the thermostat, the creak of the stairs, the faint echo of laughter that no longer lived there. Sometimes, he'd catch himself texting her something mundane, you left your charger, or saw that new place on 5th you'd like, only to delete it before sending. He didn't see Aaron again, though part of him wished he would. Not to fight, not to scream, just to look the man in the eye and see what kind of person could casually dismantle a marriage. 3 months later, on a cold April morning, there was a knock on the door. Emily stood there, pale and tired, her eyes swollen. Can I come in? He hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked in slowly, looking around as if the house itself were a stranger. It's different, she said softly. So are you. She nodded. I ended it with him. Why? Because it wasn't real. It was escape. And I kept thinking about you. He let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Now you think about me. Tears welled up again. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed to see you. To tell you that I'm sorry. He looked at her for a long time, the woman he'd loved, the stranger who'd hurt him, both living in the same face. You can't unring a bell, Em. I know. She turned to leave, then paused. You were always the better one of us, Dan. No, he said softly. Just the quieter one. She left, closing the door behind her. The rain started again, light and steady. Daniel stood at the window, watching it fall, the same rhythm as before, but it sounded different now. Not sad. Not healing. Just honest. Months later, he took a new job in Portland. Different city, different rhythm. Sometimes, when it rained, he'd still think of her, not with anger anymore, but with the strange clarity that comes after pain has burned itself out. Love doesn't vanish, it just changes shape. It becomes memory, echo, weather. And as the rain whispered against the window of his small apartment one quiet night, Daniel finally realized. He wasn't waiting anymore. He'd survived.